this afternoon. We're in our first open workshop. So, Graham, environment strategy, over to you.
It's good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. If I can have my presentation up on screen, that'd be really nice. Thank you, Zoe. So this is an opportunity well, I'll take this almost as read, certainly the first slide. So just a chance to feedback, introduce the third version, which was sent out to you at the end of last week in a revised format, and also to give you some information on what we're trying to do in terms of community engagement. This strategy, just as in terms of background, just to remind ourselves, it's part of Council's vision for building connected communities. For example, our communities have told us they'd like better connections with nature, so things like biodiversity, landscape, water, and so on. The strategy delivers or sets out aspirations for Waipa's environment, irrespective of the agency that's delivering them. So we're environmental champions, sometimes as the lead driver, or we may be taking a facilitating or supporting role within the community. The strategy incorporates Council's response to climate change. It can be seen as Council's climate strategy, but it does actually go wider than that. And certainly climate change is a major community concern. And in terms of its relationship with Ahuaki, it's both driven by Ahuaki, but also contributes to it, to the spatial plan. So it sits beneath Ahuaki. It's part of implementing the spatial plan, but because it's got more detail in there as to how we're actually going to start putting some of this into effect. So the story so far, to enable our new members to come up to speed on the story so far. This time last year, in fact, almost, I think this is the first anniversary of our partner and stakeholder workshop. We've also done stakeholder groups, focus groups. We've included iwi and Manawhenua, council colleagues, other colleagues, government departments, voluntary organisations, NGOs, businesses, farmers. You get the picture. We've tried to engage quite widely so far. The visions, principles and themes have previously been discussed in this chamber with this committee. Drafts have been available to yourselves, to staff. Waikato Regional Council have made a number of comments as well, which have been really positive. And in fact, the Waikato Regional Council have asked if they could be considered to be a partner organisation. So I sort of really hope you'd be happy with that. In which case, I can move forward if you're okay with the Waikato Regional Council coming in on this as well. We've had staff and Ahuaki lenses put across the draft so far, and that is obviously continuing as well. I did say earlier in the year that during the election time we would start developing action plans. We will see in the document we've started that, but more of that shortly. So the previous format was that we had 6 environmental challenges, and followed by these 4 different themes. However, we've found, particularly with starting on the action planning, is that this actually has limitations. It can be quite confusing as to where things fit within that structure. So I tried another way and actually thought that actually worked better, and everyone that I've spoken to seemed to find it clearer. So what that format is and what you've seen in the draft that's been circulated to you is we've now got 7 environmental challenges, 6 that we already had that are listed there, And the other one is leadership by council. So it's within council itself how we do our operations. It's that manage YPAR theme that's being transferred into a challenge. It reflects feedback from yourselves for internal leadership and leadership in the community as well in environmental programs and project work. The format aligns much better, we think, with Ahoaki. It's more consistent with the transportation strategy. We've not changed an awful lot in the actual content thereafter. The same focus groups, or they might be tweaked in the way they've been worded and distributed amongst the various environmental challenges. We think it gives clearer line of sight right from the vision through those challenges right down to the actions to implement them, so that if someone says, well, what is council doing about climate, for example, then it's all there in one place in the document rather than having to sift through the various themes, as was the case before. The action plans then, rather than being a separate appendix to the document, are then with the focus areas as well. Now these are at a very early stage. We've taken the various ideas that were put forward in those workshops, the focus groups, from staff, from yourselves, from Ahoaki, and at the moment they've just been put in there. There's still a lot of work to be done on them in working out timings and costs and priorities and so on and so forth. But we really wanted you to know that we are getting on with that this time around, rather than several years ago when the action plan didn't actually happen. So this time it is. These are the focus areas. So reading across, actually, you've got 2 around climate, 2 around Tatoi Whaimana, 2 around biodiversity, etc. So hopefully we've got everything captured there. We've still got the objectives, the measures, the targets, and the action plans within each of those. Also connecting each focus area with the other challenges as well. At the top of each table for each focus area, you can see something like that, which will highlight the connection, so you can read across other parts of the document as well, because we've now got it issue-based rather than concept-based in the formatting. This interconnectedness is really important, and the document is interconnected and intergenerational as well, because 30-year strategy, it's the young people picking it up now, it'll be another generation taking it on for the next 30 years probably. And in terms of community engagement, we are working and still happening. So we're talking earlier about a live or a living document. Well, this is a living presentation as well. We're talking about integrating the community engagement on the environment strategy with Ahoaki. A lot of the questions that can be asked are very similar, if not the same. So probably, but looking at testing whether we've got the right environmental challenges or whether we're missing anything. We might get down into focus areas. We still need to be working away to see exactly what that's going to be like. And we're also likely, through the engagement, I would expect to get more ideas to go into the action plans with people with ideas for particular projects and things. I'm quite sure that will happen as well. So in terms then of next steps, I am extremely conscious that iwi and mana whenua need to look at this version. We've not been able to arrange an opportunity to do that. I'm hoping to do that either next month or early next year, because they are really critical and valuable as partners. The engagement details to yourselves in February, that's as per Ahuaki. So the chances are that that will happen when Ahuaki comes to you again. Looking at doing the community engagement as part of the Ahuaki engagement. And the other thing in terms of when we actually work this through to final adoption, because of the links with Ahuaki and the fact that it sits underneath the community spatial plan, it cannot get ahead of the timescale for Ahuaki. So it might be either on the same timescale or maybe it's a slight step back. So in that sense, the community spatial plan will very strongly influence how fast the environment strategy proceeds from here on in. Thank you. Open for questions, Jack.
Okay, questions. Claire.
Thanks. Just on that last point about engagement and how it's going to work in tandem or in symphony with the Ahuaki thing. I mean, I actually think that Ahuaki on its own is a pretty big idea. And I was wondering how I might encourage people that have got a particular interest in the environment to maybe just focus on that part of Ahuaki, but really you want them to be across everything. So I'm sort of, my gut reaction is that I feel that there should be a separation between Ahuaki, let that go first, but then have a breath and then do more detailed stuff on the environment strategy. That's how I feel. Yeah. But I do like the way that you've streamlined things. So before, you had the challenges and then the work areas. I do prefer the approach you've taken with just the 7 focus areas, and then the logical sequence through those other, steps. I think because again, it is a complex area and it does make it a bit more straightforward. Yeah, so I do support that change. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Any other queries, questions, comments? Yes, absolutely.
This was my first time reading it, obviously, and I thought everything was all there. I kind of found this quite a hard read, though, and it wasn't about the structure. I think I really liked the structure, apart from the fact that finance and monitoring come way too early in it for me. I'd put them right around the back end. They appear on page 21, but my numbering's on diligent, not for you. So I'd put that would be the only structural change, and I thought everything was all there. There were just two comments. Is that I sort of really had a sense that there's sort of real scope creep happening here. And when you got into the action section, it sort of became much crisper because it was then narrowed down to things that Waipa actually is responsible for and can do something about. But early on, I felt like this is a strategy for everything, basically. And, environment does touch everything, but I just thought that quite a lot of the stuff being touched on was not stuff that was really core business for Waipa. It's sort of regional council all beginning to get into sort of national kind of stuff. So it felt like there was sort of scope creep, and at the same time, I thought that it would benefit from a really nice edit, just to really sharpen up the language. Basically, there was quite a lot of sort of sentence after sentence. I began, what's that trying to say? So I just thought those are my 2 things: watch scope creep, and I like the structure, but a complete run through edit, it'd really sharpen it up. Those are my comments for that.
Okay,
thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Councillor.
Roger, you have a question?
Yes, I am. Am I coming through loud and clear?
Yes, you are.
Oh, jolly good. Yeah, and just a couple that I'd shared with Graham yesterday, and it's a combination of CR3 and 4 and WD1, and that is our energy and water requirements on new builds. Am I reading it correctly that new builds will now all require water storage units incorporated? And similarly, are we making solar a requirement on new builds? There's only a hint of that there, but clarification would be good on both of those aspects.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. You're referencing some of the potential action plan detail. As I mentioned earlier, these are just taking the suggestions that have been given to us so far and just assigning them to various focus areas without any further editing work or analysis on that. In terms of making solar a requirement in new building consents, the advice we've got is actually that it's probably not something that we will go, or we'll certainly need to look again at the wording of that, because we can only encourage people to do that. There's nothing in the building or planning legislation that enables us to actually require it, at least not at this stage. And in terms of sort of water storage, we don't currently require new builds to have water storage on site. It would require a plan change if we wanted to do that, but obviously we'd need to work through all the implications of whatever that would involve. So I think the actions that we've got there, some of them are things that we know we're going to need to do, such as potentially our own emissions reduction plan, for example. But some of these other things are aspirational, and they're ideas that have been put forward. So there's quite a lot of weeding out to do, as well as getting new ideas coming forward as well, which we may get from the engagement. And the other question, Councillor, that you asked was around encouraging household composting, and the question that Councillor Gordon asked me yesterday was whether we could encourage household composting by making available subsidised or bulk purchased low-cost home compost units. My advice is that something like that was likely to be covered off in the draft waste management and minimisation plan. So that's coming to you at a future date, I believe. So watch that space. In terms of Councillor Montgomery, if I can just respond there on the scope creep. I am as conscious as you are that there are potentially objectives, if not indeed focus areas, that may be scope creep beyond the realm of council. I would rather be over ambitious and put too much in at this stage and rein it back to the right level rather than not put in enough. So I am working on that, and there are particular objectives that I've got concerns about, and I'm following through with external parties just to check whether we are in danger of overreaching. So I'm very aware of that.
Thank you, Graham. Yep.
Yeah, thanks for that, Graham. I was just coming from the point of view that you want this to be a document that actually means something, that you don't just put away.
Yeah.
And if it is, sort of precise, concise, to the point, and actually dealing with things that we are thinking about, it's much more likely to be useful. Mm-hmm. But yeah, thanks for that. I'm very happy that you were agreeing with my concerns.
Yeah, and the regional council, I will say, the regional council were very complimentary of the draft that they saw, which was actually in the previous version. So thank you, regional council.
Very good. Okay, any other queries, questions? Last one, Claire.
Sorry, it's to do with that waste minimisation plan, actually, because why couldn't you just reference it in this strategy? I had a quick look at what's covered here, and some of those things aren't actually part of the council's waste minimisation plan, I don't think. So it'd be good to sort of just say all the things that are going to be covered in the waste minimisation plan, that kind of sits under our environment strategy, but there'll be more detail in that other strategy. Yeah. You know, so just knowing, I guess it's about that scope creep, you know, but you know, what's appropriate to detail here and what's actually going to be handled in more detail in that other way, synchronization.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I've noted that.
Okay, everybody, if there's nothing else, thank you, Graham.
Okay. Thank you.
Right, we shall move on to our dog control policy bylaw. Carl's here. Yep.
It's actually me again as well. Yeah.
Kia ora koutou, good afternoon.
Thank you, Carl.
For presentation.
Okay, so while we're just waiting for the presentation to come up on the screen, you can see it's there.
All right, so just be mindful, we don't have this presentation, Carl. So this is the first time we're seeing it. Yeah, no, it's coming, but we haven't pre-read it. It's not in diligent.
Okay, as long as you can see it, that's the main thing.
It's all good.
This is the dog control policy and bylaw.
We don't have the dog control one, guys, on our diligent, no, but we'll see it on the screen shortly.
Ending 5935.
Apologies, councillors. We were sorting this on Friday with other staff. So if you just bear with us.
It's Alicia, isn't it?
Just to get on there. Be faster. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, apologies for this, Chair.
We're all ready to roll.
Councillors, it's unfortunately not had the chance actually to look at this in advance because we've got some maps and some individual sites. So it's a case of thinking on your feet, I think. So I'll hand over to Carl. Obviously, dog control is major responsibility. I'm just trying to manage this through the process.
Okay, so we'll flip through the first ones pretty quickly. So I think the first one's just to give a bit of the background of where we've come from. Oh, there we go. Cool, so this might be news for most of you. Council's responsible for dogs under the Dog Control Act. We have to have a policy. So part of that is having to review it, which is usually every 10 years. Any of the background that you want to see on the policy or the information to date will be on Council's website. And just a quick snapshot of where the business is at the moment. So just under 9,500 dogs in the district. So those are the registered ones and the ones that we know should be registered. And annual spend around that figure there. So what we want to achieve is that in terms of the dog control policy and the related bylaw, there are some requests for changes to dog prohibitions and other things that have been outstanding for quite a while. So we want to move that along. That opens up the opportunity to make other small changes that we're aware of and future-proof the policy around things like recent court decisions and stuff like that, where we want to make sure the policy is correct, up to date, and will be fit for purpose until its next review. And the policy underpins a lot of the operational activities in the animal control team. So once that's finalised, we can look at programming our services going forward and hopefully increase those services and provide some more value for money. Okay, doesn't want to go. So it's probably going to go about 10 slides here. Okay, no, here we go. Right, so in terms of the policy review itself, the journey to date, so we started informal feedback back in June. We've had the 4 public events, 2 in Cambridge, 2 in Te Awamutu. We've had the 2 public webinars, and in the background, fairly constant website and social media messaging around the different aspects of it. And that's resulted in over 300 individual comments coming in today. So a quick summary of those 300 comments. So the policy itself is divided into the written text section, which is the rules and things Council has discretion over, the guidance about how we want to deal with things where we do have discretion. Very little of the feedback was related to that part of the policy. Most of it is focused on the schedules, which records the exercise areas, the off-lead areas, those sort of things. And there's quite a number of things that are raised that were outside of the policy itself, obviously related to dog control activities and related to the policy, but not specifically within it. So that's everything from bins and equipment through to signs and enforcement. And the next little slide just does a little pictorial representation of that. And they're all things that we've taken the feedback on board and we're starting to put in place now. So things like reviewing signs where bins might be, targeting our enforcement, those sort of things. They're all things that we can do almost straight away. So a bit of work already happening in that space. Okay, next one. So a lot of the feedback, was to be expected to some extent, that dog owners ideally want more areas where they can exercise dogs off lead, walks and journeys rather than just open spaces. Access to water and swimming was another theme that came through, and sites with bush or other areas of variety for both the owners and the dogs, and how those things might lend themselves to fencing and where we put bins, some of those things. So the two main barriers that we've identified as we've gone through is the main challenge is the bylaw and the policy obviously only relate to land that council owns or manages. So we are limited in terms of what we have and what we can provide. And there are some things we simply won't be able to. That has led to the question of, are there private providers or property owners that might be able to fill that gap? So that's a very early work in progress around that. Anyone who watches Barclay Manor might know what I'm sort of talking about there. And the time frame is not lending itself particularly well to some of the reserves and areas that are yet to be developed or indicated as coming through in growth sales and subdivisions. So the best way of dealing with that is to combine it with a decision around whether we bring the review period forward from 10 years to every 5 years, so we're more responsive to some of those growth and changes. Next one. So rather than just giving you a table with a whole list of different areas and comments and stuff, I've just tried to do this a little more spatially, just using our existing map. So if we just jump onto the next one, and each of the reserves will pop up. So I'm not covering every reserve, just some of the main ones. So just as I talk about them, you can just press and it'll bring up the next one. So the first one is the existing exercise area in Leslie Street in Kiki. Was on the list potentially for skate park, but that doesn't sound like it's progressing, so it's likely to remain as it is. That one there. And then Kiki Domain, so majority of feedback is to keep that as dog off lead, with some feedback that we should exclude the sports fields there. So that's what we're looking at there. The stockade, the reserve next to the water tower was originally one that could have lent itself to off lead, but that's not likely to be in a position to be considered for that during this time frame. Let's keep going. Anchor Park has still got development potentially happening along its edges. So the discussion there is about whether we can move the area to what's more commonly known as Colgan Park, which is the south side of that reserve, and extend it into some area that council owns adjoining to that. Sorry, I misread. I think there is. Yep. So Centennial Park, that's currently off lead, looking along the lines of retaining that, but redefining it to reflect where the skate park and other developments have happened there. Memorial Park. So Memorial Park is one of the ones where it's part of the area is currently off lead, and the discussion there is whether it should remain off lead or go to on lead. Feedback there is relatively evenly split. So that will be a decision that we'll have to look at in some detail. Te Raha Road Reserve was one that was potentially going to come off, but its size and location doesn't lend itself to a lot of other things. So it looks like it would be recommended to stay potentially. And there may be options in terms of the area off Pekadale Crescent, where council owns some land, that could be an option to provide a larger space. So yeah, we'll just hold there. So I guess I should have said at the start that these are just ideas as much as anything. Certainly don't construe them as decisions or even recommendations at this stage. It's just from what's come from the feedback and the discussion amongst some of the council teams. So yeah, quite happy to take any comments or feedback on the Te Awamutu ones there. And okay, yeah. Cool, I can do that. That's something we can do now, or shall I just?
That's currently this.
Okay. All right, so some of the rural ones, not too much change in the space from the feedback. Most of the focus is on the urban areas.
Well, you know, could I ask you about Pirongia? So there's a lot of new subdivision going on in the Browns and Bandersands, sort of, it's on the east side of Pirongia. Yeah, I guess below Frontier Road and Crozier Street in there. But someone said there's no new reserves in there. And yeah, I don't know whether or not any of the, like I understand it borders a green belt, which some of it might be leased out for farming, but there's also a gully and stuff. And whether or not there's any potential there to designate that as a, you know, even if it was dog on lead or something, you know, you talked about a walk, you know, rather than an open space. So yeah, but as you said, new developments can't be captured by the policy. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll depend on the timing. So every public place is going to be dog on lead by default. So it'll only be if it gets designated one way or the other.
Oh, okay.
So potentially if there's a reserve and the time frame fits, then it could be considered for that. Otherwise it would be dog off lead by default.
Well, even dog on lead, yeah, as a dog would be quite good. Okay, thank you.
So we'll carry on then. Okay, so yeah, north end of Pirongia there's an area that's already effectively managed as dog prohibited. So looking to signal that would stay within the policy. Ohaupo, Kekatea Reserve already has a playground in it. So likely to take that off the schedule for off lead, and along with that, look at developing potentially the lower part of Memorial Park as a wider area for off lead use. The river walkway in Parongia Village, so keeping the reserve area as dog off leash, but just clarifying that the narrow walkways to the reserve should be on leash. That's the feedback for that one. Noroto, a lot of discussion and a lot of feedback in every end of the spectrum with that one. So at the moment it's off lead in front of the boating club, on leash around the lake. The general idea is that it'll probably be best to retain it as is until the reserve management plan is developed for that one. I don't know what the time frame is for that. It couldn't take effect until this policy was reviewed anyway, so we would have another look at that once that plan was developed. So Cambridge, again, not going to cover all of them, but just the ones where there has been feedback and discussion. So in the northern part there, discussions around keeping the reserves as off leash, but again, the walkways where they're narrow may have some conflict, making them all the same, all on leash potentially. Lake Takutu, so as we know, there's been quite a lot of discussion about that. So the options there are either on leash or off leash. And again, the feedback was surprisingly similar for both of those options. If we were to progress with on leash there is potential for a new off leash area just around the corner where the playground was removed on the corner of Thornton Road there. The south end of Payne Park, which is accessed off Hamilton Road. There's been some commentary around whether that might lend itself to a new off-leash area to be developed. It's currently in grazing. Retaining an off-leash area somewhere in that northern green belt, but with some flexibility to potentially move it if other changes in that area with other uses occurred. Shelley Street, retaining it as off leash, but removing the outdated agility equipment from there and replacing it or consolidating it somewhere else. Some of the thoughts there. Again, a similar discussion with the thing that's Dominion Ave walkway, whether the reserve itself is off leash, but the walkways to it may not be. And retaining the off leash areas along the wide road reserves down I can't read it and I can't remember it either. Carlisle, yes, thank you. That's the one. So very wide road reserves there. A possible discussion around prohibition being the Karapiro Gully there, where there's some strong ecological reasons for perhaps not having dogs in that area that need to be explored a little bit further. And so that's the Oak Arboretum that currently sits between the Brian Mayo off-leash area and the McKinnon Park off-leash area, whether it makes more continuity to have that piece in the middle as off-leash as well to create a walk right through that space. And I think that's Victoria Square. So quite a lot of feedback for those, or to those that were at the Victoria Square for the market, where we were talking about the policy that the square itself should potentially be off-leash. And the other options for any of these is that we could look at potential days and times where dogs could be on leash or off leash. So quite common in beach places that you allow dogs off leash at certain times and aren't at other times. So that may be an option for some of these as well. So ones that we haven't covered there, mainly because they're just simply not on those maps. So Kakapoku, as you'll understand, that request to make the Maunga dog prohibited is one of the main drivers and one of the main motivations for bringing this policy review forward. We've looked at other options where we could potentially make that happen, but this is the one that we're having to follow. So it's definitely still in the mix and will need a decision as part of this process. The peat lakes in general, a review of the ecological values around those lakes and whether they're compatible with dogs or not. Kani Whaniwha, there's an understanding that some of that was intended to be dog off leash, but it hasn't been incorporated into the current policy, so we're having a look at that. Waipuki Park and its access to to the lake is quite a strong theme that came through feedback, and there are likely to be some options for off leash at Waipuki, and it may be that the actual location of that area changes over time as the park is developed. Pukimako, we need to get some feedback on our partner's view in terms of how that is managed. At the moment, it's the default dog on leash, and we need to confirm whether that's suitable or not. There's been some discussion and comments around Sainsbury Road Reserve. The main issues there are whether that's compatible with current uses, particularly horse riding and others. The Cambridge motocross track was a one that just came in fairly recently as an option to have a look at, whether that might again lend itself to off leash. And just as I mentioned before, there are options around whether areas could have mixed use or different uses at different times that we will need to explore as part of this. So that's the quick summary of the feedback and the staff discussions. And I think the next two slides are just, so if all of that went through, the process became recommendations and were adopted as is, that would sort of be the net outcome, just to give you a bit of feel. So on balance, there would be some change in around what areas were off leash and on leash at the moment, but the net change would be more off leash areas. The converse being that there would be some areas that are not specifically prohibited now that may be for different ecological or project reasons. So that's sort of the gut feel based on the feedback if we effectively adopted all of the main items. Timeframes. I'll talk this one, Graham. Or...
I can talk to this one. So Carl's going to talk with the community boards next month to give them the feedback and the opportunities to discuss particular locations as well. The aim is then to really start the formal bylaw and policy review process with this committee when we're back in the new year, with the first report looking at the issues and the determination in February. So we'll obviously be using all of this feedback and the staff discussions as well to move those two reviews forward. We're still hoping for formal consultation April, May. It's not a drop dead date, so we're going to aim for it. But we know how the winds can blow. So we're still targeting that July, August adoption date. What I suggest, you were asking, Chair, that we send you the maps. We'll also need Carl to send explanations for each site, because just saying a series of circles on the map isn't going to be particularly helpful. So you'll need to know what the proposals are, and we'll probably ask you to feedback by a particular date, and if there's disagreement amongst you on particular sites, then we may need to come back and just get more clarification on that. But that's fine. We can live with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Graham, if we can have those distributed to us soon.
Yep.
But also to the community boards, because I'm very mindful that the Cambridge Community Board meets next week. And I'm not too sure when your next community board meeting is, but let's try and we want to get as much information and time for our residents to study the maps and to give their feedback. And I know there is a consultation later, but I just think that consultation now will be really, really helpful. Our feedback back to you before it goes back into consultation. So so the sooner we can have those maps around a bit more of a defining the spaces and the plan or proposed plan, that'll be really good. Yeah,
and certainly as we are actually, the amendments are mostly to the schedules as to whether it's on lead, off leash or prohibited. So while we're doing the review, it's not so difficult to actually move a name from one schedule to another. I'm hoping that's the case. Diana probably might have a view on that. Might not. But I think it should be relatively simple just move the location from one schedule to another as we go along. So
Okay, I
so
just
that
know how much
shouldn't hold
interest.
us up.
I just know how much interest, and Jeanette knows how much interest there is in dogs.
Yep.
And yeah, so we just need to make sure we get this process right, and we've just got as much time as we can to feed back into this. Claire, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up, Carl, about you mentioned land that might be available for exercising dogs that isn't actually council, like reserves and things. I'm thinking of stormwater reserves that developers have been doing in their big subdivisions, like Frontier Developments. It's got a big stormwater reserve there, and it makes so much sense to me that if those landowners were open to having those, I don't know if they're reserves, but that area of land that is used for stormwater management to be designated to be available for dogs as well, I think would make a lot of sense to also have those on the council website as available, for dog exercise. And I'm just wondering how that could be progressed along with this review. But obviously it needs, the cooperation, of those developers or those landowners. Yeah. Have you got any thoughts in that area, Carl?
We have historically recorded schools and play centres and other places that have requested to council that dogs be prohibited on their sites, and have loosely included them as a schedule to the policy. So it may be a similar sort of arrangement, or the policy could potentially just have a clause in it that says, private landowners may make their land available, and we do exactly that. We provide the maps and links to that, independent of the policy itself.
All righty. Hey, look, thank you. I don't think there's no other questions. No, I think, yeah, thanks for the information. Really appreciate that. And we'll just wait to get the maps, and we'll let you know how we feel and how community members feel.
Yes, thank you. And I think the key learning for us as well while we're going through this is not only do the dogs need agility, we need to be agile as well in our process.
Okay, right.
So we've got some agility equipment coming.
Excellent, thank you. All right, hey, look, well, we've got our next workshop, our open workshop item, just our approach to the long-term plan. So Kirsty's just going to speak to us for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So this is just going to be a few minutes because I did touch on this when we had the report on Ahuaki. So you'll recall when we did the debrief on the long-term plan, one of the things that we could improve was our prioritisation process as we work through projects and initiatives to feed into that process. There was also a KPMG internal audit undertaken looking at our project management framework, and there were some recommendations coming out of that relating to our business case template and process. So Becca were engaged to assist in revisiting the business case template, and that work is underway. We have also engaged them to assist us with revisiting our prioritisation framework, and the reason for that is that Becca Robert Brodnax has assisted with inputting into that business case template review. He's also been a technical input to the development of Ahuaki through the technical narratives and possible future scenarios feeding into the future scenario for the interim draft spatial plan, and has had extensive experience working in business cases with Waka Kotahi in a previous role that he had. So Becca have provided an initial piece of work to us, and that's just now being reviewed by staff. So we're not in the position to be able to share that with you today, but we will be coming back to share that with you and to seek your feedback so that then we can finalise that process as we commence the development of business cases in early 2023. This is just a touch point to let you know that it's underway in hand and we'll be coming back to you.
Thanks, Kirsty. Okay,
thank you.
Sounds good. Brilliant. Okay, everybody, so we're going to go into public excluded. But I think we'll just take a 5-minute breather because we need you really bright, really